Some killers attack complete strangers. Some target the vulnerable, the young, or the elderly. And some prey on people that they know. There are killers who are inspired by money or by revenge, by sexual deviancy, by hatred. There are opportunists and there are meticulous planners. But what unites these men and women is one simple trait. And it's the most terrifying thing of all. They live amongst us. In our towns, on our streets, in our houses. They're just like the rest of us, but capable of evil. And they could be anywhere. Welcome to Murder Town.
Do you feel it in the air? Oh. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes.
All over the UK, there are towns where murder has reared its head. But some have seen more than their fair share of bloodshed.
It's probably the most gruesome and distressing event I've ever had to cover.
It wasn't just a who's done it, it was very much a who is it.
Pontypridd was very shocked. It's the most gruesome thing I've ever known to happen. And I don't think it will be easily forgotten.
The fact they didn't know who the body was and he hadn't been missing, it could have been the perfect murder.
Tonight, we're in Pontypridd, dubbed for a while as the murder capital of Wales.
Pontypridd is a small town about 10-15 minutes outside Cardiff. It's a very close-knit community like any sort of town in the valleys. In Pontypridd, we don't tend to cover major crime. It tends to be more petty stuff like burglaries, minor assaults, thefts, that sort of thing. It's not a place where major crime happens.
But any crime here is dealt with by South Wales Police. One of their leading detectives is Gareth Morgan.
It's a fantastic area to police. You brush out into the valleys where, you know, real strong community spirit, strong community feel. People know you. It's a very local way of policing, very different to the city. So, you know, within the South Wales Police Force, you get to experience a wide range of cultures.
We have a good working relationship with South Wales Police. We're in contact with them every day about incidents. Police do rely on organisations such as ourselves to get information and appeals out there, and we do feature that quite heavily in our news coverage. South Wales Police contacted us to let us know that a woman named Tracy Woodford had gone missing from the Pontypridd area. Tracy was last seen in Pontypridd town centre, and members of her family had become concerned after she had not returned home. So officers began to retrace her steps.
The missing woman had been seen close to the train station. And Now the whole town was being scoured for clues as to where she might be.
We didn't know much ourselves until it came out on the news that they were searching for the missing person within the Pontypridd area and the rugby ground vicinity. It was complete lockdown. Nobody could get in, nobody could get out. We actually had 4 functions booked in on that particular weekend. Each one we had to cancel.
Tracy was last seen by her mother and brother on the day before her disappearance. Tracy had woken up in the morning and had told them she was going into town, which she did on a weekly basis, to buy a ring. She then left her home in Readyfelin, went to Pontypridd town centre and then visited a cash generators where she purchased the ring. After that, she then visited a number of pubs in the town centre where she drank throughout the day. Police traced her to the Skinny Dog pub, and after they spoke to a number of people working there and patrons there, it was established that she left that evening with someone.
Detectives needed to learn who that might be, and they also wanted to find out more about Tracy.
Tracy Woodford is quite well known in town centre. She's from a village called Readyfelin, which is just 2.5 miles down the road. She had a lot of friends in Pontypridd. A lot of people knew her.
Tracy was described as quite a quiet person who was quite fragile, had suffered from depression in the past, but come from a loving family. She was described by her sisters not having many possessions, but what she did have she would give to those she loved, and described as a really lovely person.
But now Tracy Woodford was missing. She'd left the pub and disappeared, and the community was concerned. But nobody could predict exactly what terrible events had occurred. In 2015, police in South Wales were investigating the disappearance of 47-year-old Tracy Woodford. She'd gone missing after a night out in Pontypridd, and nobody had seen her since. Now police were retracing her steps to find out where she might have ended up.
She visited a number of pubs in the town centre where she drank throughout the day. She visited 2 establishments before she reached the Skinny Dog pub in the evening. And that's when she met Christopher May and 2 of his friends who were regular drinkers there. Christopher May then went on to buy Tracy a number of drinks throughout the night. Christopher May was a local boy to Pontypridd. He was born in the town in the 1960s and had lived there for the majority of his life. He had trained as a butcher at a local butcher shop as a young man and had remained there for quite a while. He was a father of 2, had lived in Cardiff for a number of years with his partner. When his relationship dissolved, he then moved back to Pontypridd. The majority of people said he was quite an amiable chap and that he was quite good for banter and that sort of thing.
I worked with Chris for roughly about a month. I was a manager in a steakhouse, and I knew Chris because he was the pot washer in the restaurant. He was a very quiet person. He only really spoke when he was spoken to. He didn't really interact with any of my work colleagues at the time. He'd like to come in, do his job, and go home.
People did say there was a bit of more of a sinister side to him. He was described as quite lechy and would make inappropriate comments about women whenever they were in the pub that he was drinking in. Basically, he was someone who showed quite an obsessive interest in women and an unhealthy interest in women. And on one occasion, he made a barmaid very uncomfortable after commenting on her red hair.
Over his 50 years, Christopher May had built up a criminal record.
He was first in trouble with the law at the age of 14, where he was involved in a theft. His last conviction saw him imprisoned for 18 months for arson. He had set fire to a school and was found by the fire brigade playing a piano inside.
Now Christopher was amongst the last people to see Tracy on the night she went missing. And when police checked out CCTV from outside the Skinny Dog, they found Tracy and what looked like Christopher walking side by side.
Tracy's disappearance wasn't the first serious incident in the town. In fact, Pontypridd had once been dubbed the murder capital of Wales.
On Boxing Day 2005, rugby player Jordan Rees murdered his girlfriend after spending the day at a fancy dress party. And in 2008, Anthony Rees was beaten to death in his own home. His killer even filmed him on their mobile phone as he lay dying. But while most of these cases were reported within hours,
There was another case in Wales which took far longer to reach the police's attention.
I had been aware of Lee since about 2002. She was quite an outrageous, eccentric character. People in the village knew her because wherever she went, she'd call people darling. And she dressed very, she was, shall we say, she dressed about 20 years younger than her age. Long, cascading blonde hair, tight clothes, long red nails. Quite an outrageous character.
She was quite well known in the area as being a sort of larger-than-life character. Lived in the flats for, nigh on 20 years. Loved her garden, was well known in the community. A lot of people would say that she was quite a gregarious character and would be very flamboyant, and you'd know when Sabine was around. She would come up with these bizarre stories of her previous life as a singer, and I think she thought of herself as a little bit of a celebrity in those days, singing in Australia. But I think a lot of people took her with a pinch of salt, and especially her stories.
Lee lived in a block of flats in the small Welsh town of Baether, close to Pontypridd. Over time, she grew closer to Mary.
She was good fun, and she was quite irreverent. She had a good sense of humour, and I remember thinking that if I'd been younger, that she'd be somebody who would, be good fun to go and have a drink with and have a laugh with, that kind of thing.
Over their many conversations, Lee revealed that her husband John had left her some years before, and they had 5 children who were all living in New Zealand.
I was aware that, she was spelled Christmas by herself, and in some ways, I sort of felt sorry for her. And thought, well, she's a lonely person, that her children are the other side of the world. I hadn't seen her for several weeks, and somebody said to me, Lee's in hospital. So My sister and I went down to visit her. We saw her and she looked really ill. I mean, gone was the glamour. No one was visiting, no one was doing her washing, and she looked unkempt. Her physical condition deteriorated very quickly, and it soon became obvious that she had cancer. And that evening, I helped her to undress, and as I helped her to get into bed, she actually handed me her false breasts. She said, nobody knows this. She did a double mastectomy. She said, that's where my husband left me. She didn't want the children to come over at all. She said, if they come, they'll cause trouble. She had lots and lots of little knickknacks. And she said, have whatever you want, sell what you want. And so we said, well, yeah, if we sell things, where should the money go? Oh, well, she said it can go to Macmillan or the cancer relief or whatever. There were no family designations or anything to go to at all. And in the flat, there were no family pictures, which I found is very strange for a mother of 5 children. It was strange. She used to say to me, you know, don't you? And I said, well, what do you think I know? I know you've got terminal cancer, but I don't know anything else. And I felt at that time she was trying to tell me something else. And it wasn't until she died that things started to unravel then. She said, oh, hello, Mary. I said, oh, why are you ringing me? Any problems? And she said, what do you know about a body? We found a package in the garden which has been opened and is a decomposing body.
2 friends of Lee Sabine had been sorting through her possessions in the garden when they found something suspicious and immediately called the police.
I was sat at my desk, finishing off another case that we were investigating, just doing your paperwork when the phone call comes in, and you always know really that it's going to be the start of a busy period for you when a body's been found and it's a suspected homicide. Well, the first report to me on this occasion was the reports of a possible skeleton lying within a plastic wrapping. But we weren't sure if it was a hoax, if you like, if someone's left some sort of old remains. Is it a medical skeleton? But as things developed, it became quite clear that this was, in fact, human remains.
The body was apparently wrapped up in plastic bags and tarpaulin. But there were no immediate clues as to who or what the police were dealing with.
Traditionally, obviously you start with the victim. You look at where that victim died, when they died, who are they. And this particular investigation was very, very different in that it wasn't just a who's done it, it was very much a who is it.
So police were now investigating a mysterious body found in a garden, and they had no idea who it was or how long it had been there. But the truth was far more shocking than they'd ever imagined. When police in South Wales were called to the discovery of a body in a garden, they had no idea of the mystery that would follow. The garden was a communal area, and one of the residents who had access was a woman called Lee Sabine. But Lee Sabine had died a few weeks earlier. Now her friends were learning about the discovery and wondering if she had anything to do with it.
They didn't even know who the body was. It was just so strange. There were talks that it could have been a body that was dumped there. There were ideas that maybe somebody had got rid of a body and just thrown it over the fence, you know. It was a strange time.
There's a number of thoughts, really. You know, you have to hypothesise as a senior investigating officer. You have to consider what could have happened. So, you know, the things that go through your head, is this a gang-related murder? Has someone been killed somewhere else and dumped you? You know, is it domestic related? Is it someone has died of natural causes and just been, you know, they've avoided the burial and left the body in the garden? As it transpired in this case, none of those were relevant to the investigation.
In fact, everything that the police explored came back blank.
There were no missing persons in the area, you know, no one we could instantly think, yes, that's someone we've been looking for, that's someone who's outstanding. There were no real positive identifying features. The body had been wrapped really tightly, so it was going to take time to unravel and do the forensic work, the pathology. And we quickly identified that it was a male person. We sort of had the age range, the height. We knew this person sometime in his life had a hip replacement, and he had a full set of teeth. He was wearing Marks and Spencer pajamas, and he had a signet ring, which was an identifiable object. But, you know, in terms of identifying him quickly, then that was a different story. The person wasn't on the DNA database, for example. You know, we had no fingerprints due to the decomposition of the body. So there were a number of things which are going to make this really difficult to identify the person. And we needed, you know, an idea to work from. So, you know, that's what the main line of inquiry was at the start. Very much a police cliche, isn't it, that the answers lie in the community, but it's very much true in pretty much every case. You know, you're dealing with homicide, and you know, traditionally the answer is pretty close to where the crime occurred. And what communities give you is, yes, sometimes it's rumour and speculation, but you know, as a senior investigating officer and as a detective, you know those rumours got to start somewhere, and if you can work your way back to the source, you're normally pretty close to the truth.
And the community did have an idea of who might be involved. The eccentric former resident, Lee Sabine.
As it unravelled, the two witnesses who'd found the victim were able to tell us that when Lee was alive, she had referred to a medical skeleton which had been wrapped and possibly left in the garden, and what they said was when they went to look at the package, they believed it held this medical skeleton that Lee had referred to. Now, Lee Sabine had died in October, so her premises was empty at the time, but certainly it, you know, resonated with me. Well, who is Lee Sabine? You know, why did she refer to this medical skeleton? And so she was worthy of a further look and a closer look at you know, the circumstances surrounding her.
Lee Sabine was now the prime suspect, and cops were learning that the community, in hindsight, was suspicious too.
Lee Sabine became a significant person in this investigation and a suspect quite early on. It was then really we started to look at her lifestyle, her background, her movements. Her husband, John Sabine, and we looked at, was he possibly the victim?
Lee had always claimed that John had left her for another woman, but now police were wondering whether his departure was far more sinister.
We were able to determine that John was alive and well when they moved to Baylor in February 1997. We had proof of life. He'd signed the tenancy agreement, he'd been to the local surgery to register, he'd been prescribed medication, and there were even witnesses who recall him moving into the area. He was still on the voters register at the address, but what we found was that after April 1997, there was actually no proof of life of John Sabine. Sadly, because they came to the area with no friends, no family, no associates, and Lee had sort of spun a web to people that He'd run off with another woman, he was living in another area, he'd gone back to New Zealand. No one ever checked and asked about him, so it was naturally presumed that he'd just left the area. It took us some time. I think it was the end of December, I think, that we actually confirmed that the victim was John Sabine.
Although police now knew that the body was that of John Sabine, they still had to try and establish how he died and who was responsible. So they put appeals out nationwide to see if anyone could help.
The pathologist examined John Sabine, and what he found was there was a cluster of sharp force injuries to the back of the head, and there was a fracture right across the skull. So the cause of death was blunt force trauma. There were other minor injuries, and he'd clearly been the victim of an assault, and there was no doubt that this was a murder. It was really important that we needed the help of the media, so we went to them and we made sure that the request for witnesses went out nationwide, and that was really important because it was a lady living up in the Hull area who was friendly with John and Lee Sabine back in the 90s. And this lady contacted us in the incident room, and really it was a key part of that investigation. She recalled a conversation in 1997 where out of the blue Lee Sabine had called her one day, and she'd asked her, "How is John?" To which Lee had replied, "I've just killed him. I've just killed him. He's on the floor." And the lady replied, what do you mean you've just killed him? She said, "I've hit him with a stone frog. He's on the floor and I may need help moving him."
So Lee Sabine had apparently confessed to killing her husband, hitting him on the head with an ornamental frog. But this was a woman who was not afraid of tall stories.
Lee was such a storyteller and a character. This lady stopped in her tracks and thought, no, this can't be true. The lady called her back the following day, where Lee sort of brushed over the story. The witness asked, "How is John?" To which Lee Sabine said, "Oh, don't worry about him, he's fine." And it sort of put the lady at rest to think, oh, she was winding me up, John's fine.
But John wasn't fine. Police now had a compelling case to say that Lee had killed her husband and kept his body for 17 years. But they weren't sure whether to believe the story of the stone frog.
The stone frog was something which, again, I thought 1997, stone frog, we're never going to find it. Is it real? Was it part of the story? Because, as we know, she liked to mix the truth, with lies just to keep people away from the scent. But we did go back to the location where the murder had happened, and we spoke to the residents and people who become friendly with Lee Sabine and who Lee had left her possessions to when she died of cancer. And we asked if anyone had taken possession of a stone frog. And one of the residents there, to our shock really, went to the door and holding her door open was this heavy weighted ornamental stone frog. And the pathologist perfectly overlaid, that frog to the injury, the fracture along John Sabine's skull. After nearly 20 years, we'd recovered the murder weapon.
I started thinking, why didn't she tell me? It could have been her way of having control over something right to the very end. And if she'd admitted to it, she'd have lost control. But the fact they didn't know who the body was, and he hadn't been missing, it could have been the perfect murder.
I think it's really tragic that not only did he die in such circumstances, but no one really cared enough to ask where he was, and no one was ever concerned. And if he wasn't found by those people that day, then he'd still be lying somewhere dead now, and no one would be any the wiser. He had children, but as far as they were concerned, he was still alive somewhere. Actually, he was lying wrapped in plastic in a garden, you know, in a Welsh mining village, so really tragic circumstances.
Although Lee Sabine had died before her crime came to light, she still became one of Wales's most notorious criminals. But earlier that year, police had begun the hunt for a missing woman called Tracy Woodford, not knowing that that too would lead them to a killer.
Tracy had vanished after a Tuesday night out in the pubs of Pontypridd. CCTV had captured her leaving the pub with a mystery man. And fellow drinkers had identified that she'd been enjoying the company of a local called Christopher May. But in the time it had taken for police to get on the scent, Christopher May had been behaving strangely.
On the Thursday, he came into work punctual at 5 o'clock and I noticed scratch marks on the side of his head. I didn't think anything of that. At 10 o'clock, while I was cashing up, I said if he wants to wait, then I'll give him a lift home. He turned it down and then walked out of the restaurant. I left 2 minutes after him and he was nowhere to be seen. He was then supposed to be in work on the Friday, but didn't turn up. I didn't think much of it because he's a 50-year-old man. I thought, well, he doesn't want to be a pot wash anymore. I was aware that he'd already had a few convictions. I was thinking maybe he could be a bit of a down and out and he doesn't care about his job, so he wasn't interested in coming back in to finish his shifts.
But in actual fact, on the Friday morning, police officers paid Christopher May a visit. He was the last man seen with Tracy on CCTV, and cops needed to know where she'd gone next.
When they first knocked on his door, they were met by quite a sheepish man who didn't want to engage. Mr. May told the officers that he had left the pub with Tracy Woodford, but that he had tried to kiss her and that she had reacted in a negative way to that and had walked off. At that stage, Christopher May let the policemen in and they began a search of the property. They noticed there was cleaning products and the smell of bleach. After looking around that property, they then made the gruesome discovery of limbs in the shower cubicle. It was then that the game was up for Christopher May, really.
Faced with little choice, May admitted that Tracy had accompanied him home, and the events that followed began to emerge.
May then offered her more alcohol and got out his laptop and started putting on music. He then tried to make a move on Tracy Woodford. She rejected his advances and it was then that her life was in danger. He strangled her to death. Semen was found on Tracy Woodford and it is believed that at some point before or after her death, Christopher May had sexual intercourse with her. Once that was committed, he then proceeded to watch pornography until 6 a.m. in the morning.
Christopher May had admitted murder, but there was one more secret that he was now ready to tell police. In 2015, Christopher May had been arrested on suspicion of murder. He'd been out drinking with 47-year-old Tracy Woodford before luring her back to his home and killing her.
It was quite a shock. I was actually talking to a couple of his friends who had been with him on the night in question, and They were really shocked and horrid at what had happened.
I didn't think he was involved whatsoever. I just thought he didn't turn up for work.
And obviously he left the pub with the young lady, and they just assumed they were having a date, taking her home. But what turned out was absolutely horrific. It just baffled people.
From the pub, May had taken Tracy back to his house. But far from having a romantic evening, he'd murdered her within hours of arriving home.
Now he had some admissions to make about what he'd done with her body.
What's more shocking than the murder itself is what happened after the murder. Christopher May had trained as a butcher as a young man, and it was these skills he used to dismember Tracy in the most gruesome, fashionable possible.
Only parts of Tracy's body had been found in his flat. Christopher May revealed he'd deposited parts of his victim around the town. One location he pointed police towards was the rugby club.
A lot of investigation work within the ground. As to what they found here, we don't know. That never came to light, if they did find anything. But they actually searched every drain within the grounds itself. It's hard to believe that someone could carry out the crime they'd done and then to do what they did to dispose of the body parts. Absolutely shocking. And I say it's hard to believe that you could sort of walk past someone's house or through the town centre with knowing what you had done and with someone in a bag, in effect.
The way he heartlessly and coldly dismembered her body shows what kind of man he is.
Christopher May was charged with Tracy's murder and sent to court.
He appeared at Cardiff Crown Court in November 2015. The trial itself lasted 2 weeks. He appeared and pleaded not guilty to the murder. What he had claimed was he had blacked out in a rage after he claimed that Tracy Woodford was stealing money from his wallet, and that when he approached her, she had started attacking him, and at that point he claimed he blacked out, and then when he came back to his senses that Tracy was dead. This was obviously not the case. He had centred his attentions on Tracy because he knew she was vulnerable, and the judge later said that his actions were sexually motivated. I think one of the things that did stand out for me was when Christopher May gave evidence at the hearing, obviously in his defence. When asked about the killings, he was quite matter-of-fact about what he did, and it just struck me how cold a person could be that they could describe in detail something so absolutely horrendous and just do it as if they were reading a shopping list.
A jury didn't take long to see through May's excuses, and he was found guilty and sentenced to 28 years in prison.
I was very frightened when he did get convicted, knowing that I had worked with him and knowing that I offered him a lift home, that I'd been left on my own with him. I can't explain how I felt. It was just very frightening and shocking. It's a sickening feeling, like a frightening, sickening feeling.
It's just a shock to everybody that something like this could happen in Pontypridd. We're used to the normal run-of-the-mill antisocial behaviour and petty crime, but nothing on this scale has ever happened before.
Tracy's murder was extremely brutal. It's probably the most gruesome and distressing event I've ever had to cover.
It was very sad. A murder in any case is sad, but what he've done, I think, makes it 10 times worse. I didn't think he was capable of something like this, and it is still a shock to know that he is capable of something like this.
I think the fact this had been committed by someone who was obviously living amongst them, had been drinking in their pubs, had been smiling and saying hello to them in the street was even worse.
Pontypridd was very shocked. It's the most gruesome thing I've ever known to happen, and I don't think it will be easily forgotten.
The valleys of South Wales have endured tough times, but nothing puts a strain on a community like the presence of a killer. And in the space of a year, Pontypridd discovered two. Both Lee Sabine and Christopher May were cold and calculating in the way they committed murder and the extraordinary lengths they went to hide the victims' bodies. When murder comes to town, there's no depth that killers won't stoop to in an attempt to get away with it.